If you'd like to access all my boxing content advert-free and enjoy the convenience of listening via a podcast app with the option to download in high-quality MP3, then consider joining me on Patreon. In addition to the aforementioned perks, you'll also gain access to exclusive weekly live stream Q&A sessions and hangouts, as well as uncensored, no-holds-barred uploads which are too blue for YouTube. This includes my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Boxing Extra. There's no contract, there's no commitment, it's only £2.50 a month and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of hardcore boxing enthusiasts by signing up with me here on Patreon today.
Dillian Whyte was WBC #1 contender for how long? Was it like 2 or 3 years? And he was mandatory challenger for a good portion of that time as well. He fought God knows how many eliminators against dangerous opponents. He overcame God knows how many obstacles. It was a very, very long road, but he eventually maneuvered himself into a position where he could fight for the WBC interim world title. But he ended up getting knocked out in devastating fashion by Alexander Povetkin. And subsequently, Povetkin became the WBC interim world heavyweight champion. Dillian Whyte was dropped several places in the rankings. Thankfully for him, luckily for Dillian Whyte, he had a rematch clause in the contract and he's exercised that rematch clause. But nevertheless, Dillian Whyte at this stage is hanging on by the thinnest of threads when it comes to trying to secure that WBC title shot, which he's been working so hard for so many years to try and get. He is hanging on by the thinnest of threads. So, as you all know by now, Povetkin had to withdraw from their rematch, which was set to take place at the back end of this month. And it is in Dillian Whyte's best interests, clearly, to wait for that Povetkin rematch and not fight anybody dangerous between then and now. And they're talking about rescheduling the fight for the back end of January. So it's in his best interest to wait because he's coming off a loss. We don't know what kind of psychological and neurological damage he may have suffered. And he gains nothing. Yeah, maybe a payday, but his goal has been to fight for the WBC title. He's turned down certain opportunities in order to stay on that WBC path. So if he wants to achieve that goal, it's in his best interests not to fight anybody dangerous and just wait for the Povetkin rematch, the rescheduled date. Unless, of course, he gets a straight crack at Tyson Fury. Now, Frank Warren has shot down any possibility of the Whyte Fury fight happening. He says we don't need him. He's lost his chance. And maybe I'll speak about that in a separate video. But what to me was very revealing, and I say revealing, I already knew what the situation would be here, but to other people, this should be revealing. And that is the fact that despite it being in Dillian Whyte's best interests to just wait for that rescheduled Povetkin fight, that's the best chance he has of fighting for that WBC title anytime within the next 12 to 18 months. Despite that, Eddie Hearn comes out in the wake of Povetkin withdrawing from the bout and starts talking about Andy Ruiz stepping in to replace Povetkin and fight Dillian Whyte and save the pay-per-view. And there were other names that tried to throw themselves in the mix as well. Derek Chisora. Why on earth would Eddie Hearn, knowing how precarious Dillian Whyte's situation is, knowing that he just got knocked out badly, knowing that he's hanging on by a thread, why would he suggest putting Dillian Whyte in against Andy Ruiz at this stage when he's coming off a knockout loss? The Andy Ruiz fight doesn't get him any closer to the title shot. It's a completely unnecessary risk. Well, the reason why Eddie Hearn's doing it is obvious, right? Because he's concerned about his own bank balance. Because he wants to fill his pockets. And that's okay. It's a business. But as I've said recently about Eddie Hearn. If he wants to keep it business, that's fine. Be upfront about it. But don't then start banging on about loyalty. Don't start going down the Frank Warren route, where Warren would get up on his high horse and start talking about how these fighters are not loyal to him. Because this is an example right here of how far a promoter's quote-unquote loyalty really extends. He's not looking out for Dillian Whyte's best interest, talking about fighting Andy Ruiz in this situation. If Dillian Whyte was coming off a win, then yeah, maybe they could look at Andy Ruiz between now and when he gets his title shot. It'd still be a big risk, but Dillian Whyte has shown a willingness to take risks in the past. But right now, he is hanging on by the thinnest of threads. He may not be in a good place mentally or neurologically. And it all goes up in smoke and he loses any chance of fighting for the WBC title, maybe for the next few years, if he loses again to Povetkin. But that's his one chance of salvaging that opportunity, is the Povetkin rematch. And Eddie Hearn suggesting he fights Ruiz? I mean, it's as if he's trying to get Dillian Whyte chinned again. And if Dillian Whyte did get chinned back to back, I mean, you're talking about his career potentially being over. And that's the fight that Eddie Hearn's suggesting that he take. So, very dubious thing for Eddie Hearn to suggest is taking an Andy Ruiz fight in this particular situation. Again, if Dillian Whyte was coming off a win, different story. But right now, very, very dubious for Eddie Hearn to suggest doing that. Well, it looks like that's not going to happen anyway. Because in this interview right here, Eddie Hearn basically admitted or clarified that Dillian Whyte has dismissed any other fights taking place other than the Povetkin fight next, unless he gets a straight shot at Tyson Fury. Again, that makes sense. That's in Dillian Whyte's best interest. Either wait for the Povetkin rescheduled bout, or if you can get a straight crack at Tyson Fury, then go that route. Anything else against a dangerous opponent makes no sense whatsoever if you're actually looking out for Dillian Whyte's best interests. If you're a boxing fan and you're not really concerned about what Dillian Whyte's best interest is, you just want to see good entertainment, then absolutely I can see why you'd want to see the Andy Ruiz fight. I want to see the Andy Ruiz fight. Or Dillian Whyte versus Hunter, or Dillian Whyte versus Chisora 3, whatever the case may be. From a boxing fan perspective, no problem. But from the perspective of somebody who is a Dillian Whyte team member, aren't they supposed to have Dillian Whyte's best interests at heart? Don't they all know that Dillian Whyte has worked so hard for so many years and taken so many risks and overcome so many obstacles to become WBC mandatory? Why would they want him to risk all of that when he's so close? He just needs to overcome Povetkin in the rematch, and even that is very tough. But if he can do that, bam, he's WBC mandatory again. Why would they suggest he risk that against Andy Ruiz? It's unbelievable. But there you go. Eddie Hearn is all about business. He's all about filling his own pockets, and that's fine. Just don't bring all the loyalty and stuff into it. Don't do that, Eddie, please. Don't go the Frank Warren route with all the, fake high horse morality business. Don't do that. Or the hypocritical behavior around morality. Oh, he's not loyal and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, how loyal are you? When the fighter no longer has any financial mileage in him, at least not, your perception is that he doesn't have much financial mileage in him. All of a sudden, you're not so loyal. All of a sudden, you're looking to either move on and not give him any fights or cash him out. This is how, I'm not just talking about Eddie Hearn here, most promoters, this is how they carry on. And again, it's fine as long as they're upfront about it and everybody knows where they stand. But once they start bringing all this loyalty stuff, come on, man, leave it out. It's business. Let's keep it business and not pretend it's anything else. Not pretend that you are so-and-so fighter's friend, this fighter's friend or that fighter's friend. You're not their friend. You might get along with them. You might have a rapport, but you wouldn't be making as much effort if you didn't see financial mileage in the fighter. The reason that Eddie Hearn makes all this effort, like he's talked about with Kell Brook before, is because he saw financial mileage in him. If Kell Brook was only ever an area level fighter, and I know you've got the likes of Dave Allen, right? People say he's an area level fighter, but he's got a cult following in the UK. So a situation like that notwithstanding, if Kell Brook was an area level fighter, you think Eddie Hearn would have been driving up to Sheffield and putting in all that effort to try and get Kell Brook on the straight and narrow? If he was a guy who couldn't sell 50 tickets for a show and didn't have any talent, of course he wouldn't. So it's not about friendship. That's not the reason that Eddie Hearn puts effort in to certain fighters with certain fighters. It's because he sees financial mileage there. Like with Daniel Yelalusidov, Eddie Hearn admitted that he hasn't been putting on great performances, and therefore Eddie Hearn hasn't been motivated to actually promote him that much. And again, business is business, but don't pretend it's anything else. So anyway, looks like Dillian Whyte is just going to wait. There won't be any fight between now and the Povetkin rematch. That is the best decision for him in his current situation. And I struggle to understand why anybody would suggest any different. And I think it's actually a blessing in disguise that Povetkin has had to pull out, because it gives Dillian Whyte extra time to recover from that knockout. Other people have mentioned this, but Michael Venom Page, the MMA fighter, he talked about the residual neurological effects of being knocked out, which carried on for months. It can take months to actually clear that stuff out of your brain. And a lot of the neurological side effects of a knockout are not picked up necessarily with CT scans. I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that CT scans can't even pick up concussions. I remember when Tim Bradley, now he took a lot more damage than Dillian Whyte, but I remember when Tim Bradley fought Provodnikov. Tim Bradley said after that fight, he was suffering neurological issues for months. And again, these may not be picked up by CT scans. So with Dillian Whyte fighting Povetkin so soon after that knockout, that's dangerous. And although he did have the 28-day suspension and what have you, so there's the protocol for the British Boxing Board of Control, that doesn't necessarily mean that 28 days was enough. So I think it's actually going to work out better for Dillian Whyte to have more time to recover neurologically and psychologically, because Dillian Whyte is a very proud man. He wanted to get straight back on the horse. He wanted to get revenge immediately. That's his pride talking. But as we all know, very often pride comes before a fall. And Dillian Whyte fell first time. Second time, he could have fallen even harder if the fight had happened too soon. So I think it's a good thing. And, Dillian Whyte is, as I say, a very tough guy, very brave, but his punch resistance, ever since the Anthony Joshua fight, has never been the same. In the AJ fight, he took so many massive punches through that, first 6 rounds without going to the canvas. Uppercuts, hooks, right hands. Just go watch the fight back. Look at Dillian Whyte's head getting rocked around all over the place, especially with AJ's uppercuts. And he didn't go down until the 7th round, where he finally, at a point where he was really tired and took several big shots, he ended up hitting the canvas. But since then, he has been hurt on numerous occasions by less devastating punches than the ones he was able to take against AJ. So he got hurt noticeably in the Hellenius fight. He was down against Rivas. He was down against Joseph Parker. He was even hurt against Marius Wack. Any of you guys noticed that? And of course, knocked out badly by Povetkin. So if his first knockout defeat is anything to go by, his punch resistance is going to be even worse now than it was prior to that Povetkin knockout defeat. Because that first KO defeat he suffered against AJ appeared to take a lot out of him by way of punch resistance. So this second knockout defeat, I have to imagine, is going to take even more out of him by way of punch resistance. With some fighters, it's just like that. Once their chin gets dented, it's never the same again. And if Dillian Whyte is to recover some of his punch resistance, he needs to put more time between that knockout defeat and the rematch. And that decision has been taken out of his hands. And I think it's actually going to work to his benefit. That doesn't mean he's going to win the rematch. I just think he's got a better chance of winning the rematch if it gets pushed back to late January. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a blessing in disguise. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I'm out.